Thanks, Mark. Um, and thanks, Rachel. Good to be with everybody. Good to practice together. And I want to say a few brief words as we go into our silence about the phenomenon of patience, and maybe how and if patience relates to this practice of meditation, of sitting. I think for some of us, meditation may initially have felt, or maybe still feels like punishment in some sense, like a timeout, like sit here and think about what you've done, that there's um I know sometimes it carries that spirit with it for me, even today, or in my life in general. I think though it maybe evolves a little bit from there to still a sense that it's some notion of learning about patience is available to us always in life, right? It's one of those things. But even if we're sitting for 10 minutes, there's some sense that we are practicing patience. Maybe it's like the most foundational or fundamental instruction. We're trying to learn to sit still with ourselves and with others, until the 10 minutes is up, or until the 20 minutes is up, or until whatever the designated time is. So I think a working definition of patience, kind of at a fundamental level, could be um, just this, right? Learning, it's sort of like a do no harm. It's a restraint practice. I think at its core, patience initially is a restraint practice. Um, it's about stopping ourselves before we speak, in terms of just the patience we practice in our general relational context. Maybe also, um, in a meditative space, stopping ourselves before we merge fully with a thought, right? Or we're off to the races in terms of um, kind of leaving the inner witness behind, and and losing our way. So there's some sense that patience is what we're working on, what all of this is about. And I think in terms of related to that, maybe we get a little better at not speaking rashly, maybe we get a little better about not completely following our thoughts and being off to the races. But then I think we have the once we get to that point, which is ongoing, which we never master, there's this sense also of the nonverbal, right? The shifting, the restlessness when we're talking to another person. Um, what are we doing with our eyes? What's the energy we're giving off? My students here at Bard College have recently told me that I used to think it was enough to like silence my phone, right? But they said it's sort of an act of erasure on some level, to have one's phone on the table, even face down. They said it's just not good form. And so, it's like we're working, you become aware of these like nonverbal ways that we're always learning about practicing patience. So I want to bring a poem today, or share a poem that no doubt is familiar to some of you, a poem by Pat Schneider, and we'll put it up in just a moment. But I think it's about when patience becomes about something else. When there's enough of that sort of foundational patience, we might still be struggling with it or working with it, but of learning to sit still with ourselves, learning to be, the restraint practice that we're speaking of. Once that's established, even temporarily, what can patience become? And so there's a lovely poem here, and if we could, um, I will read it, but you can see the link to the poem right there if you want to follow along. It's called The Patience of Ordinary Things. And it's been giving me a fair amount of comfort and solace, I think, over this last month. It is a kind of love, is it not? How the cup holds the tea, how the chair stands sturdy and foursquare, how the floor receives the bottoms of shoes or toes, how soles of feet know where they're supposed to be. I've been thinking about the patience of ordinary things, how clothes wait respectfully in closets, and soap dries quietly in the dish, and towels drink the wet from the skin of the back, and the lovely repetition of stairs. And what is more generous than a window? The patience of ordinary things, right? We have the model of the cup holding the tea, the floor holding us up, clothes. And I think the last few images are really the most stunning. Clothes waiting respectfully in closets, soap drying quietly in the dish. So I think this is gives us kind of a window into maybe a deeper understanding of what patience can become. Um, it's not transactional, right? It's a patience that it's something that's outside of the realm of a quid pro quo, right? It's not anxious. I mean, I think she says it, Pat Schneider says it in her first line. It's like love, is it not? You know, it's really, I think we understand that patience becomes synonymous with presence when we're able to wait, but without expectation of what's coming. Somehow we're in the realm of this deeper presence, waiting without expectation. And then that last line, um, what is more generous than a window? I want to read just the second half of the poem one more time. Well, I'll read the whole thing because it's short. It is a kind of love, is it not? How the cup holds the tea, how the chair stands sturdy and foursquare, how the floor receives the bottoms of shoes or toes, how soles of feet know where they're supposed to be. I've been thinking about the patience of ordinary things, how clothes wait respectfully in closets, and soap dries quietly in the dish, and towels drink the wet from the skin of the back, and the lovely repetition of stairs. And what is more generous than a window? A lot of the classic Musar texts, the texts on Jewish ethics, will talk about the model of like this God as the model for the precepts, like patience, that God would be our model for patience. You know, I can so that's a lot of, you know, what a lot of the classic texts sort of have us, you know, bid us to follow kind of that imaginative projection. But I'm really feeling compelled by the imaginative projection of instead of God, you know, the shirt that's hanging in the closet that doesn't care if I haven't worn it in 3 years, right? It's like Meister Eckhart saying, when we are back in God's arms, God will not say, and where have you been, you know, these last decades? So it's a lovely model, you know, the soap drying in the dish. I think, and I, as we go into the sit itself now, um, I wonder what it's like to imagine. First of all, I think we can practice both kinds of patience, right? We can sit just in the restraint practice, right? And that never goes away, right? And that's why we have the mindfulness instructions and, you know, working with our restlessness and working with waiting. But then maybe as we go into the silence now, you know, we could even frame it as a prayer. You know, help us understand what patience is. Help us maybe to sit like a bar of soap drying in the dish. My stepfather has a lyric to one of his songs where he says, I'm dreaming of a mirror, a love that I once knew. It turned into a window, distant ridges blue. So I think of that with the last line of the Pat Schneider poem. What is more generous than a window? Maybe that's like the most beautiful way that we could hope to kind of be present for another, present for ourselves. We become that transparent. So we'll go into our silence now for about 13 minutes, and we'll come out with a dedication and also a chance to say the Mourner's Kaddish together. We dedicate this practice to all beings, and that includes dedicating whatever insight or harvest or any sense of knowing that has come to us in our sitting today. May we carry that with us, and may it be transformative of everyone in everyone's lives we touch in the course of our days. We dedicate that, but we also dedicate just the sitting itself, the emptiness of the sitting, the mystery of the practice, the ways where we can't even see visibly what it is impacting. But in this way, we also dedicate our sit this morning. May all beings be blessed.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Joshua. Friends, we seal the practice as we do every day, offering those of you in mourning, observing yahrzeit, a chance to recite Kaddish. If you're not reciting Kaddish, please stay present for those who are for a few moments. Thanks to Rachel for sharing the words of the Kaddish on the screen. You can put the name or names of those you're honoring today in the chat now, or in a few minutes after we recite Kaddish. And if you are joining me, please rise in body or in spirit, and you can unmute at this time. Yitkadal, Yikadash, Shemei
Amen.
Ma'at
Yalma
Yifrach
Ibrahim
Yisrael,
Chayefon Yomem
Chaye B'chol
Beit
Beit
Yisrael
Yisrael,
V'ala
V'Iman
Karim
Karim
Yishme
V'Imru,
Rabba Mavarach
Yishmei Rabba
Mavarach
Mavarach,
Olam
Olam
Ar B'Tomam Yitadar Yitale V'Kasal Shmei Chadar Chayla V'Olam Shirata Ishbekata B'Nechesad Yalma Ishlamoraba Mishamaya V'Dima Lenu V'Tokol Israel V'Imru Aseh Shalom Shlomar Aseh Shalom Lenu V'Alkol Yisrael Alkol Yoshvei Tevel Amen.
Shalom, Amen. Shalom, Aleinu, Ya'kol Yoshvei Tevel.
Amen.
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 May all of you who mourn, may all those who are in mourning be comforted, and thank everyone for staying present to support those who are in mourning for the Mourners Kaddish, and thank Rachel Huget for holding our text space today, and our teacher, Rabbi Joshua Boettiger, who is the Jewish chaplain at Bard College and Rosh Yeshiva at the Center for Contemporary Musar. Also, always just a treat, pleasure to learn from and sit with you, Joshua. Thank you so much. As always, you're invited to stay on for a conversation with our teacher today, and you can put questions in the chat. Keep an eye out. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please preface it by writing question all in caps. And or just feel free to share reflections on your experience with the practice today. And Rachel, maybe you can share the link to that beautiful poem again in the chat. Joshua, thank you so much. It was really quite restorative today. Beautiful. And so many facets to that poem. First question I have, let's see what questions come up in the chat. Playing a little devil's advocate, I guess, is in the times in which we're living, where we can feel a sense of urgency, right, to act on all the various issues, crises, threats, perceived threats. How do we? I think this practice of patience, we'll dive a little deeper into what we mean by that in a second. Can be perceived as being passive at a time when we need to be active. I guess that's the gist of the question, right? So how do you square that in a time, which seems to call for action, right? I mean, it's a general question about this practice, right? It seems like sit and do nothing, right? But which we're not really, that's not really what we're doing, but I want to invite you to
Well,
just a comment on that.
I think about that you know, in the rabbinic literature, right, where it says it names all of these mitzvot, very active mitzvot, you know, what like making sure everyone can have a wedding who wants to have a wedding, coming early to the house of study, burying the dead. You know, it's this, as I think a lot of us might be familiar with that, lists all of these fundamental mitzvot, and then says in the study of Torah is equal to all of them. And it's a similar first thought. It's like, really? Like that's, but I think it becomes like a sort of test for us. Like if we're studying Torah correctly, so to speak, we will be moved to act in the world in this way, you know? And so I think maybe it's not exactly the same thing, but this sense that I think when we're doing it correctly, again, so to speak, like meditation is far from being a navel gazing thing. I mean, I think maybe there's a leap of faith involved, but it's a faith or a trust that's grounded in our experience that if we're really able to sit without, I guess, or at least work with our urgency, right? Work with our anxiety, like make room for it, trust that, you know, if we're able to kind of come into that deeper place of patience, as we're describing it, as Schneider called it, you know, I think we will be able to see more clearly what needs to how we might be useful. Like we'll come out of that without having our, you know, our Yetzer Hara, or our like more like we'll probably be making better decisions in terms of how we can be active in the world if we're seeing more clearly. But it does take, I mean, it's that sense of it. It's hard to get there, particularly in trying times where we feel like I could sit here for half an hour or I could be doing X, Y, and Z. And like when you put it in that equation, it feels like it's a good question to ask. So we have to like measure ourselves. Like, well, how is this practice bearing fruit? And is it helping me to move into the world, into this relational, political, social matrix in ways that are skillful?
Beautifully said. It's really true. It's like taking that as, you know, this stillness that is the, you know, that hopefully will inform our actions so that it is wiser, more infused with love, more infused with all the qualities. And there was a question that we'll get to about, you know, the relationship between mindfulness meditation and the practice of midot. Before we get there, I want to actually zoom in a little bit on the English word patience, and you know the Hebrew equivalent for this quality, the midah, which sometimes is sablanut. You know, that's what you had in mind, but I can't remember if you even used that or not. Which has this kind of connotation of forbearance, right? Of being able to hold something, kind of like the dish that's holding the soap that's drying, I guess. But then the other one I was thinking of when you were talking about the idea of kind of imitatio Dei, imitating God's ways. That's the midah, where God is described as erech apayim, you know, slow to anger, which came up in the chat, which literally means long of breath, right? Taking a long breath. I don't know. So I wanted maybe just to dive a little bit into, you know, how you understand. You know, it doesn't have to. We have to be so precise about it. We're using the word poetically here, so it can be a lot of connotations. But do you see a distinction between those two, or it's the same thing? What are we talking about here?
I think, well, Savlanut, right, as you know, and Rabbi Ira Stone would always really follow the definition in that, you know, who's my, you know, Musar teacher, right? That you named, Mark, in terms of like, it's very much the etymology is like bearing, like having, like bearing the burden of the other, right? And there's no way of really ducking that. So what does that look like? I don't know if the poem, I think what I would say is it sort of speaks to your first question. I mean, I often find that it's mysterious to sit with others and to think about what is it that I can sit with another and sort of say, it's like a companioning. What we're saying, whether we articulate this or not, is I'm going to sit here. And we've sort of worked with this at the Center for Contemporary Musar. So it's not bearing the other's burden or even bearing the other as your burden, but bearing the other's burden with them. And so I think there's something in sitting that maybe, again, can clarify that for us. And again, if the practice is true, God willing, we come out of the cushion with a sense of like patience. This practice of patience is making me aware of how I can bear the burden of another with them.
Right.
So I mean, that's because I think, right, some of these midot, some of these precepts, like we can't really duck the immediacy of what it means. We can't spiritualize the concept away. Like it really, calls forth that your opening question of how do we measure?
Yeah. I guess there's like, I kind of like how the all gets blurred, because there were a lot of words that were used almost synonymously, like love, presence, gratitude. What's the end of, what's the last line of the poem?
Yeah,
The hymn?
generosity.
Generosity.
Yeah.
Right. Like they're all like, they're just like different facets of the same gem, right?
Yeah.
They're all, the different aspects of what we're talking about, and they all kind of include the other. So as soon as you start talking about one, then we start noticing all these others as well. But I do want to pick up on one thing you just said, which I don't think I've ever really thought about. Maybe people here have thought about it, because this is even though people will participate in these sits asynchronously on their own time, the real power comes from when we do this all together. And there's something about, when you talked about bearing the burden, I don't remember exactly how you put it, like you said, bearing the burden collectively, right? And the kind of ease and, strength, comfort, love, really, that people experience when we do this together, even though we're, geographically in different places, is palpable. We can feel that, right? We're sitting alone in our own box on the screen, but also in our own space. But we can perceive the presence of each other, holding the space and holding the time and reserving the time and showing up. And that's really an act of love, right? As well as presence. And people can feel gratitude. This comes up all the time, when people express this in the chat. So I really want to appreciate, what you said to wrap that up.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I've thought that, like, there's a third way, right? If, like, in the presence of all of the problems of the world, we can go to sleep to it because it feels like it's just too much, right? And so there's that sort of tendency. We can take it on our shoulders, which won't work either, right? To like really feel like we're going to be the one to. But I think the third way is knowing that we share this work with all beings, and I think to the degree that we can be reminded of that when we sit, and it's exactly as you say, in my direct experience of like that. What is that energy? I mean, I might not know what other people are sitting with. They might not know what I'm sitting with, but it's like, it's somehow we're like wind at each other's backs. It's like such an interesting way of being in community. That's, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just say a PS to what you said about, like, just in this poem, there's like 4 midot. Like she shows that like patience is really love, generosity. I think the great, like, Musar secret is that all the midot are the same. I mean, maybe it's like this sphero, like I like that
They
what you
each
said,
contain,
like,
right? They all
they each
contain
all the others, but
right.
they're just ways that the moment presents itself where we can bring, like, God willing, like presence and love and service. It's just slightly distinct, right? The frequency of each one.
Yeah, it is. It's beautiful. It's very beautiful. A couple of people mentioned, and I'll just, it's worth lifting up, that the quote from Viktor Frankl, that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom to choose our response, which is one, quote, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom, which is, we quote that a lot at IJS with our own mindfulness and mito practice. So that, what this poem is describing is, I think, this right of cultivating that space between stimulus and response, as you said, response to my first question. I was also interested, there was a question here from Cheryl, when you talked about the student talking about turning their phone down as erasure and bad form. You want to
Oh,
invite you
yeah.
to say a little bit, what do you think, what does that mean?
Well, I think I might have phrased that wrong. Like what I feel like people from, like our generation, it's like we're not fluid with the phones and generally. And I felt like when I was going to start hanging out with college students that they would be like cyborgs, but they're not. They actually have much more grace with their phones. It's probably, you know, but I was asking them about, I was thinking that if I had my phone, but I had it face down on the table,
Right,
like I was being respectful. But
right.
the very act of placing your phone on the table when you're having a conversation with someone is sort of like saying, this is here and it could
Also,
interrupt me and
right.
I could leave this relationship at any time.
So you're not really fully present,
Yeah.
even if
So
you're
they
acting
said,
as if you're present.
yeah,
Right,
they said don't have it on the table. So I mean, it's like I didn't know, it's like, but it's like those are the little things I think that are so fascinating about working with patients and nonverbal patients and presence, right?
right. But so that enables you to be more patient, like to put the phone, turn it off, put it away, put it away. It's just one more illustration of the connection between what we're describing as patience and presence. Um, and being able to, and presence is not easy, right? I think there's the other, just to throw that in, right? Why is that? Presence is actually can be very, we might feel like we're yearning for presence. We really want presence, but presence is also intimacy, which can be uncomfortable, right? And for whatever reason, for a lot of people, maybe other people would say, no, not uncomfortable at all. But I think deep connection, presence, we're drawn to distraction. Um, for a reason, and it's countercultural, like you're pointing out.
Yeah, and it's hard won. I mean, to the degree like presence is not, I guess one way of talking about presence is that which is sort of always here that we can remind ourselves and tap into it. Like into it as it. And then maybe also there's like, say with a sit, we might be working with that first form of patience for like 95%, 99% of our time meditating, but maybe we get just like a percentage, like just 1% where we kind of drop into presence. But I think it might be interesting thinking about what you're saying. Maybe I think the whole thing is like presence is hard, it's hard won. And I think it's both effortless and always available and hard won. And I think it's useful to really, because as like people who talk about meditation, right, we throw these terms around like, what do we really mean by presence? What do we really mean by patience?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where having a community of practice, like this is our laboratory to kind of, if not figure it out, like talk about it together, commiserate together.
We're at time. This was beautiful. Thank you so much, Joshua. Really,
Thank
really
you, Mark.
appreciate it. Always a blessing at this time. And just a reminder, so tomorrow we'll be led by Rabbi Shir Meir-Fight, will be joining us also from upstate New York, I assume. And very delighted that Rabbi Shir will be leading us tomorrow. On Wednesday, Kat Koren will lead us from Israel. On Thursday, I'll be leading our sit. It's the Thursday, our sit is in partnership with Dorot as one of our quarterly meditations related to aging. And I'll be leading that one on Thursday, and Friday, El Shai returns to lead us to sit together into Shabbat. So we'll look forward to that as well. Thanks to Rachel for holding our space today. And just to note that by request, the Zoom room will stay open for a couple of minutes for people who might want to save the chat. If you want to share a few closing blessings or words of appreciation in the chat, you're welcome to do that. And look forward to seeing everyone soon. Many blessings, everyone. Be well.